Hello, I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet 21 and the Enfield Climate Change Action Forum, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar today. This is one of the many webinars we do in GlobalNet 21, which deals with major issues, and Enfield Climate Action Forum is planning to do a series of videos around climate change and the importance of that to particular localities like the one we live in. And what we plan to do in this particular webinar is look at the whole idea of community mobilisation, when communities get together to make a difference in a time of crisis. And we know that in the present crisis, that of COVID-19, that the community has responded in a remarkable way. They've got together to help people in need, and they've done it with a huge amount of energy and a huge amount of imagination. And what they've done to do that is they've developed extensive community networks and an infrastructure to make it work. And they've realized that in order to achieve what they want to achieve, they have to collaborate together. Now, what we want to look at in this webinar is how they did that and whether there are any lessons to learn in what is probably the greater crisis facing us this century, and one that will grow and grow, and that is climate change. Climate change, for many people, seems so far away, and often people only react in an immediate crisis. So can the community mobilise now as they need to in order to help solve or at least mitigate the problems of climate change? Well, to help us with that, we have both Adam Mcgibbon and Emma Rigby, who we're going to interview. Adam has been developing some infrastructure in northern Enfield, in the North London borough, to help people who are in need because of the crisis of coronavirus. And Emma Rigby has done the same, using her community interest company and volunteers and other people to try and help people who are also in need. She very quickly got 600 volunteers together and mobilised the community very quickly. And she's done a similar thing in the area of community safety, where she's got a whole series of volunteers to help people who feel, or children who feel threatened outside of schools because of bullying. And so they are both very capable people and the right people to interview for this particular webinar. Okay, so let's start the webinar right away. And the first thing we did was we asked both of them to tell us a little bit about themselves and what they do.
I'm Emma Rigby. I'm the founder and director of Love Your Doorstep Limited in Enfield. We run the largest community forum here, and we look after over 700 local businesses. We also run a number of community projects, which one of them we'll talk about this evening.
And yeah, one of the things that I've been involved in during this crisis is mutual aid, the groups that are set up to help people through this crisis that we're in at the minute.
Okay, well, that gives a brief description, and we'll go through some of the things you've done as we go through the webinar. But it's been interesting. See, during the present crisis of COVID-19, has it surprised both of you about how civil society has responded in the way that they've done it? Emma?
No, it hasn't surprised me at all. To be honest, I could see it coming the way it did. And communities always pull together and step up at this time. So it's been no surprise to me, really.
Oh, that's interesting. I would have thought some people might have found it surprising. What about you, Adam?
I think there are always community-minded people, such as Emma, who are always the first people to put their hands up and say, yes, I will help, and yes, I will do that. And I think that's fantastic. And that probably isn't surprising, because there are people there that are always willing to help others, and we should be thankful for that. But I guess what's more surprising to me, and I guess it really shouldn't be, is how so many people across the UK have got involved in mutual aid groups. There's about 3,500 mutual aid groups in the UK at the minute helping people with coronavirus, and about a total of 4 million people involved in them. So that's absolutely fantastic. To me, that was quite surprising, a really good thing. I think there are always great people in civil society who will step up and do things, but the emergence of this huge network of 4 million people out there helping each other was really surprising to me and very pleasant.
certainly made the Prime Minister say there is such a thing as society now, which is sort of really interesting. But the other sort of thing that's interesting is that the real stars and heroes in this have been public service people and the voluntary sector, the community groups, much more than local government and national government. Does that sort of surprise you as well? Or did you, Emma, for example, think that is what would happen?
I thought that is what would happen. I think we're all in agreement that local authorities and government take a long time to get going, that they're a bit clunky, which is completely understandable with being such large organisations. So it was always going to be the community groups and the mutual aid groups that have come together that could act immediately and move much more quicker. And we knew that the local government groups would catch up. So it wasn't a surprise for us either.
And for you, Adam, you've experience of government being slow to respond to what communities want, haven't you?
I have many criticisms of governments. What I would say is that what's been really nice about this is how it's put a spotlight on what we are now referring to as key workers, right? I mean, everybody is a key worker. Everybody does the job that's important. But it's really nice to see the respect that has always been due to people like refuse workers, NHS workers, them getting that respect. I agree with them. It's certainly the case that government takes a while to get going, particularly local government that suffered 10 years of austerity cuts that's made it a lot less nimble. But it was always going to be the case that much more nimble and dynamic community groups were going to be faster to get going, and local government was going to catch up.
Okay, so you both have experience in mobilising communities and being the catalyst and the facilitator in a way. Emma, without telling a long story, because you could take the whole webinar on this, but could you tell us how you've mobilised communities, for example, in the COVID-19 situation and in community safety?
Yeah, so just really briefly, so Love Your Doorstep has a community interest organisation, which was set up last year to get our community patrol initiative off the ground. So you've got to remember that I'd spent a year working in the CIC sector and also mobilising volunteers and setting up the community patrol scheme. And I think I've mentioned before, I sat on a strategy board in central London with the Met Police, Scotland Yard, the Fire Service and MOPAC, and it's all around community resilience in time of crisis. So I knew that when something like this would happen on a local level, that a lot of people would be turning to Love Your Doorstep, just because of our 9-year, nearly 10-year history in the borough. And it's funny because my team say to me now, you said this was going to happen. And when it did happen, and when I reached out for help to those larger organisations that I sit on that board with, they kind of shrugged and went, we don't know. And so I quickly mobilised over 500 volunteers within the borough. And because of our history in Enfield, I was able to gather together all of the connections that we'd made over the years with our community groups and community organisations. So the first thing for me was making sure that lines of communication were opened up immediately so that we didn't have any doubling up on anything.
Okay, and Adam, you've also been involved, haven't you, in the COVID-19, but particularly in Divest Enfield. How did you set about mobilising communities in those two different particular issues?
Yeah, it was sort of a convergence of my interests, really, because I know some of the people who were involved in setting up the national coordinating body for the mutual aid groups. I know them through environmental activism that I've been involved in. So it was a bit of a coincidence, really. So I've been involved in this community campaign, Divest Enfield, which is about trying to move the council's investment funds out of fossil fuels. But when this happened, I heard about mutual aid groups through some of my environmental contacts. And essentially what mutual aid is, it's not a new concept. It's about people coming together to solve problems collectively, because as we all know, we're much better at solving problems when we act together. So the people who set up the mutual aid national website just printed some guidelines about how to do it. So it was very do it yourself. I live in Enfield Island Village, so I set up a group for Enfield Island Village, and I advertised it on a couple of groups, and before you know it, lots and lots and lots of people started to join. And from there, we were able to start organising leaflet drops to tell people that the group exists, and in order to find people who need help, but also to find people who can give the help as well. And in terms of what that help is, it's mostly been, for the most part, doing shopping for people who are self-isolating, walking dogs, picking up prescriptions. And that kind of help is really vital, not just for the people who are ill, for people who are elderly, for people who can't leave the house, but it also helps people remember that they're not alone. And actually, that was something that was really crucial in those first couple of weeks when this was happening, because I think, we're all a little bit used to this now. Nobody's enjoying it, but we're used to it. At the start, it's actually quite hard to remember just how terrifying it all was. So for me, this was partly about finding the people who needed help, but also it was about being useful and feeling useful, because we all need that, and especially in a crisis. Just to say a couple of things quickly about what other mutual aid groups have been doing. There's at least 6 other mutual aid groups in Enfield. There's one for Edmonton, Palmer's Green, Winchmore Hill, and there's a broader group for all of Enfield. But there's also groups all over the country. And for example, there's one in Leeds that's not only been doing all the things that I've just spoken about, they've also been gathering makeshift PPE for NHS workers. So they started to find people who had, visors in their garden sheds, goggles, things they could give to NHS workers. And the thing that's so great about this is that it's totally complementary to what other people have been doing, like what Love Your Doorstep have been doing. So we've been coming across people who, for example, might need some help from the food bank, or they need help from another kind of service. We've been able to refer those people on. So what everyone's been doing is overlapping in quite a nice way, because it means that nobody's getting missed.
Okay.
Mutual aid is.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that when you're doing something in a crisis like this, you sort of learn as you go, and you have to do it pretty quickly. Emma, I mean, you've done so much. What have you learned from what you've been doing?
I've learned so much. I mean, I can sit here and say that I could see that something like this was going to happen, and I kind of had a strategy in my head about how we would pull it together. But every single day has been a learning curve for us. So within the first week, we grew from, there were 2 of us as volunteer admins on the project. We've now got 9. So that was huge in itself. We set up all the processes behind the scenes, which, when you're running a business, it is okay, but we had to link it in with all of our charity partners too. So I could go on forever about this, but every single day we're learning. But one thing that definitely needed to happen was a coordinated approach, because if people start doing their own things, what we do find is it doesn't have that nice overlap, like Adam said, and then resources wasted. So yeah, I think we have done it extremely well. I'm really proud of the way that our group has worked together. And the amount that we've achieved over the last 6 weeks has just been remarkable. So,
and you both have been doing great jobs, but this is the crisis of COVID-19. But let's move on to what will probably be even a bigger crisis for this century, and that's climate change. Adam, what sort of impact do you think this will have on our communities?
Climate will obviously have a massive impact on our communities. Emma used the word resilience there, and that's actually a really key word. We need to have a resilient society, and we've found out through this COVID crisis that actually we don't have a resilient society. We are all a couple of paychecks away from being out on the street. We're all a couple of meals away from having nothing to eat. So climate change is going to create a situation where we may have food scarcity. Even in developed countries like the UK, we are going to have more extreme weather. Life is going to change in lots of ways. It's a slow moving crisis, and that's what makes it different from COVID. It happens over years rather than over the course of weeks. So it's harder to see, it's much less tangible, but it's a really serious crisis. But I think there's lots and lots of lessons that we have learned through this that can be applied to climate change.
Isn't it amazing, Adam, just to see, like, I was taking a walk yesterday and the new rivers cleared up. I can actually see the bottom of it for the first time in 10 years. I mean, I think we just all need to stay indoors for a few more months, and we'll see an even bigger impact.
But let me ask you, because we did a webinar, didn't we, with your brother?
Yeah, don't ask me any of those.
No, I won't ask you any of those questions, but he was in Washington, and he's deeply concerned about that. Are you concerned about the impact climate change will have on our communities?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I listen to what he says as well. We have regular talks about it, the bits that I understand, but he's been working for years on this. And I think the biggest thing, again, as Adam said, is mobilising communities and getting people to understand. It's not until something hits us in the face, like this virus has, that people snap into action. And with something like climate change, it is slow, but it is coming, and it's happening every single day, and we need to do something about it.
So, I mean, you're right that, some people look upon climate change as not a problem now. I mean, we know it's a problem now, but people don't feel it. And it's engaging people is about getting people to feel it. So if we're going to get that engagement, Emma, from your experience of getting people to feel, how do you think we can do that?
Crisis has certainly got everyone working together, an immediate crisis. I think just making sure that we're educating people, but it has to be coming from the right people. And I think our younger people are going to be a huge asset for us with climate change. I mean, I've got a 12-year-old, and he seems to understand a lot more than most people. They're talking about it in the school education system, which I think is fantastic. I think we're going to see a new generation coming up that has a lot more care going on with our planet. So that's exciting as well. I think learning about it and just continuously working together to try and solve the issues around climate change.
With climate change, we know from the International Panel on Climate Change that, to try and get our temperature to be below 2% or 1.5%, which is bad enough, is going to be very difficult. And we're on a trajectory now of 3 to 4%. And that's going to have tremendous impacts. And you mentioned some of them, but one, for example, is flooding. Now, if we had flooding in parts of London, I mean, how would civil society react to it? What could we do you think?
I think there's lots of immediate things that people can do, and it probably looks quite similar to some of the stuff that's been happening in Enfield over the past 6 weeks. Making sure people have got shelter, making sure people have got food. But I think the key to all of this is not just reacting when something horrible like that happens. We need to be doing the work yesterday, basically, to get us to the point where we can get onto a track of keeping global warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius average warming, as you mentioned, Francis. And I think one of the things that's quite significant about this whole crisis is that, there are no silver linings to this. It's obviously, everything's horrific, but one of the positive things that we've discovered is that there are millions of people in the UK who will step up in a crisis. 4 million people in mutual aid groups. I'm quite excited about what those people could do next. If they decide to remain involved in their communities, there's a huge amount of stuff they could do, not just on climate change, but on all sorts of justice issues. But on climate change, they could be pressuring their local councils to do more. They could be moving their money out of fossil fuel finances. They could do an awful lot of stuff if they act collectively. So it's about reacting to disasters when they happen, but also planning proactively to mitigate whatever's going to happen in the future.
And Emma, you've done so much work in a crisis. Do you think this crisis has in any way prepared us for another crisis like climate change? Adam just said we need to be prepared. Because we've been through this, are we beginning to understand that being prepared is absolutely essential?
Yeah, I totally agree with Adam. I think what's happened is I thought our network was big before, and for years I've been working on building that network, but the network is so strong just in the last 4 weeks, and that's not going to go away. The work that we've achieved in these 4 weeks, these people that we've worked with will gel us together to take us into more and more situations like this together as a community. And it's allowed people to get more involved. I think the biggest thing for us is we knew that people wanted to help, but I come back to it being a coordinated approach as to the way that we did that. And the help that has been offered, that's one thing that's completely blown my mind. Every single day, it's like we've got walking angels amongst us, seriously. Like what people are doing for this community, I can't even begin to explain. It's just amazing.
It's amazing, but would you, you know, having got the infrastructure you've got, which is growing, which is great, would you now just let it sort of tide over until something happens, or would you try and get people prepared from now to think in terms of the crisis that we're going to face?
Absolutely, from now. So we've got bigger plans. We want the consortium that we've set up, even going beyond the coronavirus, to continue. What worried me the most was that there were families out there even before this virus that were not getting proper meals. I mean, it's absolutely crazy that that's happening. And of course it's happening, but when you're busy in your day-to-day life and you're getting on with things, you don't actually see that. So what we have set up now will continue under the CIC organisation. We never want any families to go hungry ever in Enfield. We want that consortium always there so people can reach out if they need anything. And being involved in this group, all of these types of things will come into it, from the Community Patrol Initiative, Francis, youth crime, to climate change, to making sure that local people are getting the information that they need, so that they're on top of what's going on in all of this stuff. I think that's one of the important things as well, is communication.
And in doing that, Adam, you know that we formed an Enfield Climate Action Forum. I mean, do you think it's important for organisations to do that, to bring all the voluntary groups together and pressure groups together and try to get them to think about how they can coordinate what they do?
Yeah, totally. I mean, you know, as I said, this whole crisis is a huge illustration of how you can do more together than you can do alone. And, you know, I've been in plenty of meetings over the years where it's just environmentalists talking to each other. But one of the nice things about the Enfield Climate Action Forum and other forums like it is that there's a genuine effort to reach out to faith groups, communities of colour, people who aren't usually represented in that climate change discussion, which tends to be largely a white and middle class debates. But as soon as you start broadening it out, it can become way, way, way more powerful. And it's probably worth saying that with the Divest Enfield campaign, we're nearly at the end of the campaign now. We're cautiously optimistic about the moves that the council are. We've only got to this stage because of the fact that we were able to reach beyond the usual environmental milieu. You know, we were able to find people from all walks of life who are interested in this, and that's the way that you get to a resilient society.
Okay, I mean, it's good. It's good listening to you and you talking about how prepared we have to be, and you, Emma, talking about infrastructure. Do you think government, both local and national, understand? And do you think they're prepared for the crisis, or do you think they tend to wait, where civil society is more instant, more flexible, can respond more quickly?
For me, I don't think they do wait. I think they try and get on with what they're tasked to do. I think that communication, again, and relationships have been broken down. They've been broken on a local level, and they need repairing. I've seen other boroughs work extremely well with community organisations, and it should be applauded. But in Enfield, unfortunately, it's not working like that, and it has an effect on all of us. So I think the only way forward is working together, and it's working, like I said, extremely well in other boroughs, and other councils are doing it effectively.
And you've had experience in Divest Enfield, haven't you, Adam, about working with the council? I mean, you're sort of optimistic that you can, because you faced a lot of opposition and a lot of anger and so on, and you're now getting there. I mean, is there a feeling that working together with government is essential, even though you're going to get angry at times?
It's very important that we push government to do the things that need to be done for these long-term problems, because a lot of them involve short-term, difficult decisions, and they'd rather not take those decisions. So you need to use the weight of civil society to make those things happen. And that goes for COVID as well as climate change. It might have been that our central government could have been more prepared for this pandemic 3 or 4 years ago, but they didn't want to take the short-term decisions that would have involved spending a bit more money on pandemic preparedness that would have made us more prepared. So that's just an example about how you need to push the central and local government to be more prepared for these.
Okay. What's interesting about what you said, Emma, and you might want to respond to that, is that civil society isn't about responding in emergency, though it is, and that's probably the most important thing, but it's also being powerful enough to make government realise they have to do something. So civil society becomes an immense pressure group on government.
People think democracy is every 4 years you turn up and get a piece of paper and put it in a box, but everything that we do every day in civil society, every piece of engagement with politicians, that's democracy. That's what democracy actually looks like. Sometimes it's loud, sometimes it's noisy, sometimes it's quiet and sending an email, but for me that's what democracy really is, not just voting every 4 or 5 years.
I mean, can you tell me, Emma, from your experience and what you've done, are you optimistic about the future and the way civil society can respond and cope, or do you have a few reservations?
I have a few reservations, of course. I'm sure most people would. I'm quite optimistic most of the time, but right now is an extremely scary time for all of us. I think today was the first day that lockdowns really got to me. I've been pretty good up until now, but today has been particularly difficult. I think so much more working together needs to happen. And I see this all the time in New Zealand. We work together so well, and I find here it's just about harder sometimes to break in and work together with certain groups, and it just shouldn't be like that. It's all about working together for the better good of our communities. And I think that the UK, the Brits have done exactly what they would normally do, and they've stood up and they have helped, which is what I would expect from Britain. But there's still a lot of learning in regards to people communicating properly and working together.
And what about you, Adam? Are you optimistic about the future, or do you think that the problems of climate change are so great that we're going to really face a very, very difficult time?
I think there's two possible futures here, right? Future number one is that we use all of this goodwill and connectiveness that we've discovered through this crisis, like the mutual aid groups, those 4 million people. We use it to reconnect communities. And we have a green recovery from COVID where we build industry, green jobs, green transition, and move away from our polluted economic model. And then we deal with all the problems that we face in tandem. The second possible future is that we don't do any of that and we continue with business as usual, and we end up in a much less rosy future. But I feel like I have to be optimistic because I know that human beings can overcome incredible odds. And we, the people who are alive right now, we are the people who are alive during this incredibly pivotal moment in human history where we are the last generation that can do something about climate change and save millions of lives. So you have to think optimistically about that and wake up every day and think, what am I going to do to push us in the direction of a more sustainable, livable future? So you have to be optimistic about that, because otherwise you're not going to have the wherewithal to really do this fight and win and get the great future and the livable future that we all deserve and need.
Well, the last question to you both is, if people wanted to get involved in any of your organisations as we build this capacity to be able to respond to what's going to be a huge crisis in the future, how would they get in touch with you, Emma?
People can contact me via our website, or email addresses hello@loveyourdoorstep.co.uk. Anytime anyone wants to contact me, please do, and we'll just link you in to the CIC community stuff that we're doing.
And Adam, how would they get in touch with you?
So if you want to be involved in mutual aid, the best thing to do is go to www.covidmutualaid.org and find your local group. If people are interested in getting involved in climate and environment stuff in Enfield, then the best thing to do is Google Enfield Climate Action Forum, and all the details of all the organisations that are working on climate in Enfields will come up.
That's great. Well, thank you both of you, because I think, you know, we're at the beginning of building that infrastructure now. This crisis has probably helped us think that we're going to have to, and both of you have done some fantastic work on this. And you're quite right, we've all got to work together. We've got to get local government as well as national government to work together with everyone and not let personal relationships or anything get in the way. And that's really, really important. So thank you for doing this, because I think it will spark a lot of discussion. And so we'll end this interview now.